The man who never looked up from his phone left a $0 tip and had no idea the woman he ignored would one day hold his entire future in her hands. He walked into that diner every single morning. Same seat, same order, same cold silence. He never once looked at her, but she saw everything, and one day the world would too. This is a story about invisible people, quiet dignity, and the kind of revenge that doesn't make a sound until it's too late. Stay with this until the end. You won't see it coming. Chapter 1: The Man Who Never Looked Up. The bell above the diner door rang at exactly 7:14 every weekday morning. Nobody needed to check the clock. They just needed to hear the sound of leather shoes on linoleum, sharp, impatient, like the man wearing them had somewhere better to be and wanted everyone to know it. His name was Derek Calloway, 41 years old, regional VP of a mid-sized investment firm. Navy suit, silver watch, jaw set like he was perpetually annoyed at the world for existing. He was the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller just by walking into them. He always took table 4, corner booth, window seat, back to the wall. He never asked for it. He simply walked toward it, and if anyone happened to be sitting there, he'd stand close enough that they'd feel the pressure and move. They always moved. His order never changed either. Black coffee, egg white omelette. No salt, no toast, a glass of water with exactly 2 ice cubes. He'd read somewhere that more ice diluted the minerals. He'd believed it ever since and never questioned it again. Maya Ellison had been his waitress for 11 months. She was 29, with tired eyes and quick hands and a ponytail that never quite stayed in place no matter how many times she fixed it during a shift. She worked the morning rush Monday through Saturday. Sometimes picked up a Sunday if rent was close. She was saving for something, though some weeks it felt like she was just surviving for something. She knew Derek's order by heart. Had it entered into the tablet before he even unfolded his jacket. She'd tried, in the early weeks, to be warm. A smile. A good morning. Once, when he looked pale and stressed, she'd quietly brought him a small glass of orange juice on the house and said she thought he might need it. He didn't acknowledge it. Didn't look up, didn't nod. Just moved it to the edge of the table like it was in the way. After that, Maya stopped trying. She learned to be invisible around him. Refill the coffee when it dropped below halfway. Replace the water before he noticed. Never linger. Never speak unless spoken to, which was never. The other waitresses called him the ghost. Not because he was quiet, because he looked right through people like they weren't there. But Maya watched him. Not out of admiration. Out of something quieter and more careful than that. She noticed the tension in his shoulders that never quite released. The way he scrolled his phone with a focused desperation, like he was waiting for a message that never came. The wedding ring he still wore on his left hand. The rumor in the diner was that his wife had left 18 months ago. She noticed all of it, and she said nothing. That particular Thursday morning in late October, Derek sat down, phone already out, coffee already on its way. He didn't look at Maya. He didn't say thank you. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the woman setting down his cup had just received an email that would change both of their lives. She slid the coffee onto the table without a word. He didn't look up, and somewhere in the quiet click of her shoes walking away, something that had been building for 11 months finally began to move. Chapter 2: The Woman Nobody Saw. Maya Ellison had not always been a waitress. That was the thing about people like Derek. They looked at a uniform and decided the story was already written. They never thought to wonder about the chapters that came before. 3 years earlier, Maya had been sitting in a different kind of chair, a leather one, in a corner office on the 14th floor of a marketing consultancy in downtown Chicago. Her name had been on a client roster that included 2 Fortune 500 companies. She had a team of 7 reporting to her, a salary that made her mother cry happy tears, and a 5-year plan she'd laminated and kept in her desk drawer. Then her mother got sick. Not the kind of sick that gives you time to prepare. The sudden kind. The kind where the doctor's face tells you everything before his mouth does. Maya had taken a leave of absence 2 weeks. She told herself, 2 weeks turned into 2 months. 2 months turned into a quiet phone call from HR that used words like restructuring and difficult decision and ended with the sound of her carefully built career closing like a door. She'd moved back to Clover Falls, the small Ohio town where she grew up, to take care of her mother. She'd taken the job at Patty's Diner because it was 3 blocks from the house and the morning shifts let her be home by 2. Her mother passed 8 months later. Maya stayed. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because leaving felt like abandoning the last place her mother had breathed. Maybe because she was more tired than she'd admitted to anyone. Maybe because some part of her needed the simplicity of knowing exactly what each day would ask of her: coffee, omelets, water with 2 ice cubes. She told herself it was temporary. That was 14 months ago. This particular morning, after delivering Derek's coffee, Maya slipped into the narrow hallway beside the kitchen and opened the email again on her phone. She'd read it 4 times already, but she needed to read it again to believe it. It was from a woman named Joanna Vance, executive director of the Callaway Group Foundation. The Callaway Group Foundation. Maya had stared at that name for a long time the first time she'd read it. She knew the name. Everyone in Clover Falls knew the name. The Callaway Group had quietly bought up 3 blocks of downtown real estate over the past 2 years. Their foundation had just announced a major community development initiative: grants for small businesses, housing support, job training programs. The email explained that Maya's application submitted on a quiet Sunday night 6 weeks ago, mostly out of something that felt more like desperation than hope, had moved to the final round. They wanted to meet her in person in 2 weeks. Maya leaned against the cold wall and exhaled slowly. Her hands weren't entirely steady. She thought about her business plan, the one she'd been quietly building in a notebook she kept under the diner counter, a community marketing co-op, connecting small local businesses with affordable branding support. She'd seen too many good places close because they didn't know how to tell their story. She believed in it completely. She just hadn't believed anyone would listen. Back on the floor, she moved through the morning rush with practiced efficiency. Table 7 needed more syrup. Table 2 had a problem with their eggs. Table 4, Derek had somehow already drained his coffee and was holding the empty cup out without looking up, an absent gesture like he was reaching for a light switch. Maya refilled it without a word. He didn't say thank you. She didn't expect him to. But as she walked away, she noticed something she hadn't before: a small printed logo on the folder sitting open beside his laptop. A clean navy emblem. 3 interlocking letters. TCG. The Callaway Group. Maya stopped walking for just 1 second. Then she kept moving, her face perfectly calm. But her mind was running at a speed the morning rush had never asked of her. Chapter 3: The First Crack in the Wall. The meeting at Table 4 lasted longer than usual that morning. Maya noticed because she noticed everything. It was a habit born from years of reading rooms, first in boardrooms, now in dining ones. Derek's phone calls were usually short, clipped, the kind of conversations that ended before the other person finished her sentence. This one was different. His voice stayed low, but the tension in it carried. She caught fragments between the kitchen noise and the clatter of plates. Timeline is the problem, Marcus. Board won't wait past December. We need the community angle or the whole thing collapses. He ended the call by setting his phone face down on the table slowly, deliberately, and pressing 2 fingers against his forehead like he was trying to push a headache back inside his skull. Maya refilled his water without being asked. He didn't look up, but this time, something made her pause for just a half-second longer than usual. Not out of sympathy, out of recognition. She had seen that exact posture before in her own reflection, 3 years ago, the night before she'd gotten on a plane to come home and watch her mother disappear piece by piece. It was the posture of someone holding something too heavy and refusing to put it down. She walked away before the recognition could soften into anything she didn't want to feel. That afternoon, Maya sat in the back corner of the Clover Falls Public Library, her favorite thinking spot since she was 12, and opened her laptop. She told herself she was reviewing her grant application. Instead, she found herself pulling up everything she could find on the Callaway Group. The company had been founded by a man named Gerald Callaway, Derek's father. She discovered Gerald had died 2 years ago, leaving the company and the foundation to Derek, who had relocated from Chicago to manage the transition. The foundation's community initiative, the Rooted Future Project, was Gerald's final vision, a way of giving back to the smaller towns the investment firm had quietly profited from over the decades. According to a local news article from 3 months ago, the project had hit unexpected turbulence. There were whispers of internal disagreement, a board that wasn't convinced the community grants were worth the optics risk, a December deadline that was either going to cement the initiative or kill it entirely. Maya sat back. She thought about the logo on Derek's folder, the email from Joanna Vance, the fragments of his phone call. She thought about her application, her business plan, her proposal, her carefully written belief that small communities deserve to tell their own stories. And then she thought about something else entirely. She thought about 11 months of invisible service, of orange juice pushed to the edge of a table, of thank you withheld like it cost something. She closed the laptop. She was not the kind of person who let bitterness make decisions for her. She had worked too hard at that particular discipline. But she was also not naive. If she walked into that foundation interview in 2 weeks, there was a real possibility that Derek Calloway would be in the room, and he would have absolutely no idea who she was. The question was, what was she going to do with that? She packed up her bag slowly, walked out into the cool October air, stood on the library steps for a moment, watching the town move around her, the bakery that struggled every winter, the bookshop that couldn't afford a website, the family-owned hardware store losing customers to a chain that had opened 20 minutes away. All of it quiet, all of it worth saving. She made a decision, not the one bitterness would have made. Something harder. Something that required her to be more than what she'd been reduced to. She was going to walk into that interview and win it on merit alone, but she was going to walk in knowing exactly who she was facing. And this time he was going to have to look at her. She didn't know yet that by the time that meeting came, everything about Derek Calloway's world would already be cracking at the foundation. She didn't know that in 6 days, he was going to walk into the diner looking like a man who'd lost something he couldn't name. And she didn't know that she was going to be the only person who noticed. Chapter 4: When the cracks become craters. 6 days passed. Maya counted them without meaning to. Monday, Derek arrived at 7:14. Sharp as always. Phone call before the coffee cooled. Left without looking up. Tuesday, same. Wednesday, same. Thursday, he was 12 minutes late. Maya noticed because table 4 sat empty long enough that another customer almost took it. Something about that small disruption felt significant, though she couldn't have explained why. Friday, he didn't come at all. The morning felt oddly unbalanced without him, like a song missing a note everyone had stopped consciously hearing but somehow still needed. Patty, the diner's owner, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who missed nothing, slid up beside Maya during a slow moment and nodded toward table 4. Your ghost didn't show, she said. He's not my ghost, Maya replied. Patty smiled the way older women smile when they know something you don't. Maya refilled the salt shakers and said nothing else. He came back on Monday, but the man who walked through the door at 7:26, 12 minutes late again, was not quite the same man who had left the previous Wednesday. The suit was the same. The watch was the same. But something underneath had shifted. His jaw wasn't set with its usual cold certainty. His eyes, which Maya had rarely seen clearly because they were always aimed at a screen, moved across the diner with something unfamiliar in them. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who wasn't sure where to sit. Then he found table 4 and moved toward it with practice habit. But the leather folder wasn't under his arm. The phone went face down on the table immediately, not at the end of a call, but at the beginning, like he was deliberately silencing something. Maya brought the coffee without being asked. He looked up. It lasted less than a second, just long enough for their eyes to meet in the way that eyes do when one person is paying attention and the other is suddenly surprised to be seen. Then he looked back down at the table. But he had looked up. That had never happened before. Thank you, he said. 2 words. Quiet. Slightly rough at the edges, like they'd been sitting unused for a while. Maya didn't react. She nodded once and walked away with the same professional calm she brought to every table. But her pulse had done something small and inconvenient. She found out what had happened the way most people in Clover Falls found things out, through Donna at table 9, who knew everyone's business and considered it a public service. The Calloway Group is in trouble, Donna said, leaning across her coffee cup like she was sharing state secrets. Board voted last week. They're pulling funding from the foundation's community project, the whole Rooted Future thing gone. Derek Calloway fought it. Apparently. Fought hard. Lost anyway. Maya kept her expression neutral. That's a shame. Shame is right. My nephew was counting on one of those small business grants. Donna shook her head. They say Derek's been trying to hold it together for months. His father built that foundation from nothing. Now the board's treating it like a budget line. Maya thought about the email from Joanna Vance. The interview still scheduled for Thursday. Is the foundation shutting down completely? She asked carefully. Donna shrugged. That's what nobody knows. Some people say Derek's got one last place, some kind of presentation to an outside investor panel. If he can show the community initiatives have real-world traction, the board might reconsider. She sipped her coffee. But he's got, 9-10 days? 9 days? Maya walked back to the counter slowly. Her grant interview was an 8. She thought about her business plan sitting in that notebook under the counter. She thought about the board that didn't believe in community investment. She thought about Derek Calloway cold. Absent Derek Calloway fighting for his dead father's dream and losing. She thought about how easy it would be to feel nothing about that. She was surprised to discover that she didn't. Not because she owed him anything. She owed him nothing. He had spent 11 months making her feel like furniture. But the Rooted Future project wasn't about Derek. It was about Clover Falls. About the bakery and the bookshop and the hardware store. About people like her mother, who had built something small and real and worth protecting. She pulled the notebook from under the counter, opened it to a fresh page, and began to rewrite her presentation from the ground up, not just to win a grant, but to prove something to a board of people who had decided that communities like this one didn't matter. She didn't know yet that someone had been watching her write. She didn't know that Joanna Vance had already made a phone call. And she had absolutely no idea that the investor panel Derek Calloway needed to impress in 9 days included a seat that had just been quietly offered to her. Chapter 5: The Revelation That Changed Everything. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just after 7. Maya was at her kitchen table, surrounded by printed charts, color-coded index cards, and 3 different versions of her opening statement, each one slightly bolder than the last. Her laptop was open. Her cold coffee sat forgotten beside it. The notebook was open to a page so covered in notes it barely had white space left. She answered without checking the name on the screen. Miss Ellison. The voice was professional, warm, unhurried. This is Joanna Vance. I'm sorry to call at this hour. Maya straightened instinctively, the reflex of someone who had once lived in a world where calls from executives required a certain posture. Not at all. Thank you for reaching out directly. I'll be brief, Joanna said. Your application has done something fairly unusual. It's generated conversation well above the standard review process. A pause. I'm calling because the format of Thursday's meeting has changed, and I believe you deserve to know before you walk in. Maya set down her pen. We're no longer conducting individual grant interviews this cycle. Another pause, deliberate, carefully placed. Instead, we're convening a full investor panel, community stakeholders, board representatives, and 2 external development partners. Your proposal will be presented alongside 2 others, evaluated live, and the panel will make a funding decision in the room. The kitchen was very quiet. Miss Ellison, are you still there? Yes, Maya said. I'm here. I want to be transparent with you, Joanna continued. The foundation is navigating a significant internal challenge right now. This panel isn't just about individual grants, it's about demonstrating to our board that community-based investment produces measurable, real-world value. The right presentation, the right story could shift the entire direction of the Rooted Future project. Maya stared at the wall above her laptop. Who else is on the panel? She asked. Joanna's answer was careful. Board representatives, our 2 external partners, and our foundation director will be present. The foundation director, Maya repeated slowly. That's Derek Calloway. A beat of silence. Yes. Maya closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. 11 months of invisible mornings assembled themselves in her mind like a quiet film reel. The untouched orange juice, The empty thank yous, the way he looked through her like she was made of air, the wedding ring, the phone always face down, the man who carried something heavy and never once considered that the woman refilling his coffee might be carrying something too. "Miss Ellison," Joanna said gently, "I also want you to know, and I'm telling you this because I think it's relevant, that Derek Calloway personally flagged your application." Maya opened her eyes. "I'm sorry?" "He reviews every final round application. Yours was one of 3 he marked with a priority note." A brief pause. He wrote 2 words beside it. "Exactly right." The kitchen felt like it had shifted slightly on its foundation. "He doesn't know who I am," Maya said. It wasn't a question. "No," Joanna confirmed. "He knows your name, your proposal, and your background summary. He doesn't know you're—" She paused delicately, a familiar face. Maya looked down at her notebook. At the proposal she had rebuilt from the ground up, at the case she had constructed not out of anger but out of genuine belief. He had called it exactly right. The man who had never looked at her, the man who had moved her orange juice to the edge of the table without a word, the man who had spent 11 months treating her like a piece of the furniture. He had read her words, her real words, her truest professional self, and recognized something worth fighting for. She didn't know how to feel about that. She wasn't sure she needed to decide tonight. "I'll be there Thursday," she said. Her voice was steady. After the call ended, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen, turned to a fresh page in the notebook, and wrote a single line at the top. "Make them see what they've been looking at all along." She underlined it twice. And then she wrote the most important presentation of her life. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Derek Calloway was sitting in his car in the diner parking lot at that exact moment, engine off, staring at a name on his phone screen. Her name. He had just made the connection, and from the look on his face, visible only to the empty street outside, he was not yet sure what to do with the earthquake that had just moved through him. Chapter 6: The Weight of What He Never Said. Derek Calloway did not sleep that night. He sat in his home office until well past 2 in the morning, the desk lamp casting a narrow yellow circle in the dark. The rest of the house was quiet in the way that houses become quiet when they've been empty long enough, not peaceful, just absent. He had pulled up everything. Maya Ellison's application, her business plan, her professional history, the consultancy, the client roster, the career that had been quietly, systematically dismantled by circumstances no one would have chosen. He read it all twice. Then he pulled up the diner's employee records, not for any legitimate business reason, just a number he had for Patty's because the foundation had once considered the building for a community partnership. He found Maya's name in a staff listing so unremarkable it hurt to look at. Maya Ellison, morning shift, 11 months. 11 months. He pressed his hands flat against the desk and stared at the wall. He was not a man who revisited his behavior easily. He had built a professional identity on forward momentum, the belief that looking back was a luxury that serious people couldn't afford. His father had taught him that Gerald Calloway had been a man of relentless forward motion, and Derek had inherited the instinct without always inheriting the warmth that had balanced it in his father. But tonight, forward momentum had nowhere to go. He thought about the orange juice. He didn't know how he remembered it. It was a small thing, the kind of detail that should have dissolved instantly in the current of a busy morning, but he did remember it. A small glass, quietly placed, a gesture so understated it barely registered in the moment. He had moved it aside without looking up. He closed his eyes. He thought about the year he'd had, the board battles, the slow erosion of his father's vision at the hands of people who measured legacy in quarterly returns, his marriage ending not with a dramatic collapse but with a quiet conversation on a Tuesday evening. "I've been invisible to you for 2 years, Derek," and the terrible, clarifying realization that she was right. He had become a man who looked through people. He wasn't entirely sure when it had happened. Somewhere between the grief of losing his father and the pressure of holding everything together, he had retracted into himself so completely that the world outside had become a kind of background noise, present but unheard. And Maya Ellison had been in that background noise for 11 months, bringing him coffee, replacing his water, enduring his silence with a dignity he hadn't deserved and hadn't noticed, while building, in quiet stolen moments, something genuinely brilliant. He picked up her proposal again and read the opening line for the third time. Small communities don't lack potential, they lack someone willing to help them tell their story. He set it down. The person who had written that sentence had been standing 3 feet away from him every morning for nearly a year, and he had never once asked her name. Wednesday arrived gray and cold. Derek walked into Patty's diner at 7:14. Precise as always, but the leather folder was gone. The phone stayed in his pocket. He sat down at table 4 and folded his hands on the table like a man who had made a decision and was waiting for the courage to follow through on it. Maya appeared with the coffee. He looked up before she reached the table. She saw it immediately, the directness of it, the absence of the usual somewhere else focus in his eyes. She kept her expression neutral and set the cup down with practiced ease. "Good morning," she said, professional, even. "Good morning." He paused. A muscle moved in his jaw. "I don't think I've ever actually said that to you before." Maya looked at him for a moment. "No," she said simply. "You haven't." The honesty of it landed visibly. He absorbed it without deflecting. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. The diner moved around them, plates, voices, the bell above the door. Maya didn't move. "For what specifically?" she asked. It wasn't hostility. It was precision. She needed to know if he actually understood, or if this was the vague, self-protective apology that powerful people offered when they felt briefly uncomfortable. His eyes didn't waver. "For 11 months of making you feel like you weren't there," he said, "that's not acceptable. And I'm sorry." Maya studied him for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once, measured, neither warm nor cold. "Thank you," she said, and walked back to the counter. Derek watched her go. He had expected, perhaps, relief, some loosening of the thing that had kept him awake all night. Instead, he felt the full weight of what an apology could not undo. And somewhere beneath that weight, something else, a realization still forming, still finding its shape. Tomorrow, she was going to walk into his boardroom, and he had absolutely no idea what she was going to do to all of them. Chapter 7: The Woman Who Walked into the Room. Thursday arrived with the kind of quiet that precedes something irreversible. Maya woke at 5:30 without an alarm. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Then she got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window watching the sky turn from black to gray to a pale, tentative blue. She had laid her outfit out the night before, not the diner uniform, not the careful but cautious clothes she'd been wearing for 14 months in a town that had come to know her as the waitress at Patty's, something older, something that had been folded in the back of her closet since Chicago, a structured charcoal blazer, clean lines, quiet authority. She put it on and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was someone she recognized but hadn't visited in a while. She picked up her notebook, walked out the door. The Callaway Group Foundation offices occupied the top floor of a restored building on Clover Falls Main Street, the kind of space that announced its intentions through high ceilings and good light. A receptionist greeted Maya with professional warmth and led her to a waiting area where 2 other applicants sat with the careful stillness of people managing nerves. Maya sat, crossed her ankles, opened her notebook to a blank page and wrote nothing. She was not managing nerves. She was managing something more complicated, the precise calibration of a person who knows exactly what room they're walking into and exactly what it has caused them to get there. At 9:15, Joanna Vance appeared. She was 50-ish, silver-haired, with the kind of eyes that assessed quickly and warmly at the same time. She shook each applicant's hand in turn. When she reached Maya, something small and knowing passed across her expression. "Miss Ellison," she said, "we're glad you're here." "Thank you for the call," Maya replied. Joanna held her gaze for just a breath longer than necessary. Then she led them toward the boardroom. The room held 8 people. 4 board representatives, older, suited, arranged along one side of the table with the particular stillness of people accustomed to making decisions that affected other people's lives. 2 external development partners, laptops open, expressions professionally neutral. Joanna took her seat at the near end. And at the head of the table, Derek Callaway. He was already looking at the door when they walked in. Maya had prepared for this moment. She had rehearsed her reaction, the measured recognition, the professional composure, the refusal to let the personal bleed into the professional. What she had not prepared for was the expression on his face. It wasn't surprise. He'd known she was coming. He'd had since Tuesday night to absorb that particular shock. It wasn't guilt, though that was present too, somewhere underneath. It was something closer to awe, the quiet, rested recognition of a man seeing something clearly, for the first time, that had been in front of him all along. Maya met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she took her seat with the other applicants, opened her notebook, and waited. The first 2 presentations were solid, competent, the kind of proposals that demonstrated research and good intention without quite catching fire. The board listened politely. Questions were measured. Applause was brief. Then Joanna said, "Maya Ellison." Maya stood. She didn't open her notebook. She had decided, somewhere around midnight on Tuesday, that she wasn't going to read from anything. She knew this material the way she knew the diner floor, every corner, every variable, every place where something could go wrong, and exactly how to navigate it. She looked at the board first, then the partners, then briefly, deliberately Derek. "Small communities don't lack potential," she said. "They lack someone willing to help them tell their story." The room was very still. She spoke for 19 minutes. She talked about Clover Falls, not in the abstract, generalized language of grant proposals, but specifically the bakery on 4th Street that had been operating for 31 years and had never had a functional website. The family hardware store losing 30% of its customer base to a chain that spent more on 1 weekend of digital advertising than the hardware store spent on marketing in a year. The bookshop owner, 63 years old, who had built one of the most curated community reading spaces in the county and whose story had never been told outside a 3-block radius. She talked about what a community marketing co-op would actually do, not in theory, in practice, month by month, business by business, story by story. And then she said something that nobody in the room expected. She looked directly at the board members who had voted to defund the Rooted Future project and said, "I understand there's been a question about whether community investment produces measurable returns. I'd like to offer a different question." She paused. "What is the cost of a community that stops believing anyone is listening?" The silence that followed was the kind that means something has landed. One of the board members, gray-haired, previously impassive, slowly uncapped his pen. Derek Calloway had not moved in for minutes. Maya closed her notebook, which she had never opened. "That's everything," she said. "Thank you for your time." She sat down, and across the table, she watched Derek Calloway do something she had never seen him do in 11 months of mornings. He leaned forward, both hands flat on the table, and he began to speak, not to the board, not to the partners, but directly to her, with the full, undivided attention of a man who had finally, irrevocably looked up. What he said next would change everything. And what he didn't know was that Maya had one final card left to play, one piece of her proposal she had deliberately held back. A piece that would either save the Rooted Future project entirely, or burn the last bridge between them to the ground. Chapter 8: The confrontation that cracked them both open. Derek's voice was steady when he began, but his hands were not. Maya noticed, because she noticed everything, the way his fingers pressed flat against the table, like he needed something solid beneath them, like the ground had shifted and he was finding his footing in real time. "Before the panel responds," he said, his eyes still on Maya, "I need to say something on the record." Joanna looked at him carefully. The board members exchanged brief glances. Nobody spoke. Derek straightened. "This foundation was built by my father on a single belief that the people most overlooked by large institutions are often the ones holding communities together. He spent 40 years trying to prove that." He paused. "In the past 18 months, I have failed to protect that belief against people who measure everything in margins and nothing in meaning." The board member with the uncapped pen set it down. "I also need to acknowledge," Derek continued, and here his voice changed, quieter, carrying more weight, "that I have been guilty of the same failure on a personal level, of looking past people, of being present without actually seeing." He finally looked away from Maya just briefly to address the full room. Miss Ellison's proposal is the most precise articulation of what this foundation was designed to fund that I have encountered since my father wrote the original charter. He slid a copy of her application to the center of the table. I am recommending full approval immediately. One of the board members, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Holt, who had led the vote to defund the Rooted Future project, leaned forward. Derek, the board's position hasn't changed. One strong proposal doesn't restructure our concerns about ROI. I know, Derek said, which is why Miss Ellison and I are going to address those concerns directly. Right now. He looked back at Maya. If she's willing. Every eye in the room moved to her. Maya had known this moment was coming. Not the specifics. She hadn't known Derek would position it this way. Hadn't known he would put himself on the line so publicly and so completely. But she had known that the presentation alone wouldn't be enough. That the board's resistance wasn't about evidence. It was about belief. And belief required something evidence alone couldn't provide. Which was why she had held something back. She reached into her notebook and removed a folded set of papers, crisp, printed, carefully prepared. She stood. Miss Holt, she said, addressing the board member directly. You're right to ask about return on investment. It's the right question. It's just been aimed at the wrong data. She placed a copy in front of each board member. Over the past 6 weeks, while preparing this proposal, I conducted informal outreach to 14 small businesses in Clover Falls. I asked them one question: if you had access to professional marketing support for 12 months, what would change? She waited a beat. The answers are in front of you. But I want to highlight 3 numbers. She had rehearsed this. She delivered it clean. 31% the average projected increase in local foot traffic based on comparable co-op models in similar markets. 44% the number of the businesses I spoke with that said they would hire at least one additional part-time employee within the first year of growth. And 100% every single business owner I spoke with said they had never been contacted by anyone asking what they needed. The room was silent. That last number, Maya said, is your ROI problem. Not the investment. The absence of it. Patricia Holt picked up the papers. Derek watched her read. Maya watched Derek. For a moment, the boardroom contracted to something almost private, two people on opposite sides of a history that only one of them had fully lived, standing in the same room for the first time as equals. Then Patricia Holt looked up. Where did you get these projections validated? She asked, not hostile. Genuinely asking. Dr. Carmen Reyes at Ohio State's Community Economics Department. Maya said, her contact information is on the last page. She's available for questions. Another board member was already reaching for his phone. Joanna Vance was doing the particular kind of not smiling that people do when they are very pleased and maintaining professionalism by the thinnest margin. Derek said nothing. He didn't need to. But as the board members conferred in low voices over her data, he looked at Maya with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not from him. Not from anyone in a very long time. Respect. Full. Uncomplicated. Unqualified. She held it for a moment, then she sat down. The deliberation took 11 minutes. Patricia Holt called the room back to order. The board would like to propose a conditional approval full funding for Miss Ellison's co-op initiative, contingent on quarterly reporting, with a 12-month review tied to the Rooted Future project's continued operation. Derek looked at Patricia. And the project's continued operation? A pause that lasted long enough to matter. Will be put to a vote, Patricia said carefully, in light of today's evidence. It wasn't a victory. Not completely. Not yet. But it was a door cracked open where there had been a wall. The meeting concluded with handshakes and careful smiles. People filtered out in clusters of conversation. Joanna touched Maya's arm briefly as she passed a small, warm pressure that said more than words. And then the room was nearly empty. Just Maya, gathering her notebook, and Derek, who had not moved from his seat. You held that data back, he said quietly, not an accusation, an observation. Maya looked at him. Yes. Why? She considered the question honestly. Because I needed to know if the presentation alone was enough, if the story was enough, before I brought out the numbers. She paused. Numbers convince boards. Stories change them. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then your mother would have been proud. Maya's hand stilled on her notebook. She looked at him sharply. You read that far into my application? I read every word, he said simply. The sentence landed somewhere deep and complicated. She had written about her mother in the personal statement briefly, honestly. A paragraph about why she believed in small communities, why she had come home, why she had stayed. She had not expected anyone to mention it. Certainly not him. She closed her notebook slowly, looked at the man across the table, not the ghost of table 4, not the cold VP in the navy suit, but whoever was underneath all of that, the man who had lost his father and his marriage and nearly his father's dream, all in the space of 2 years, and had apparently been too broken to look up long enough to see the people around him. She understood that kind of breaking. She didn't say so. Not yet. What she said was, you should fight for the revote. Your father's project deserves better than a conditional approval. Derek nodded slowly. I know. He paused. I'd like your help. Professionally, if you're willing. Maya picked up her notebook, walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. Come into the diner tomorrow morning, she said. Table 4, 714. She heard something behind her, not quite a laugh. Something quieter and more complicated than that. I'll be there, he said. She walked out. And for the first time in 11 months, she walked out of something that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. But there was still one conversation left to have. One thing neither of them had said yet. One truth sitting in the space between a refilled coffee cup and an untouched orange juice, waiting, patient as the woman who had placed it there, for someone to finally acknowledge it was real. Chapter 9. Everything he almost missed. He was there at 7:14. Maya saw him through the diner window, before she pushed through the door, sitting at table 4, hands folded, no phone, no folder, no armor, just a man in a navy coat watching the street like someone who had recently remembered that the world outside his head was worth looking at. She tied her apron, picked up the coffee pot, walked over. He looked up before she reached the table. She was starting to expect that now. She filled his cup. He watched her do it with the quiet attention of someone cataloging a thing they had previously taken entirely for granted. Thank you, he said. 2 words, but different from the first time he'd said them 3 days ago. Less rough, less like something being excavated, more like something that had found its natural place. Maya nodded, turned to go. Maya. It was the first time he had used her name. She turned back slowly. Derek looked at his coffee cup for a brief moment, gathering something, then looked up at her with the directness that had replaced his old, practiced absence. I've been thinking about what to say since Tuesday night, he said. I've rewritten it about a dozen times. A pause. I'm going to stop rewriting it and just say it. The diner moved around them. Plates. Voices. The bell above the door. Maya stood still. I spent 11 months sitting 3 feet away from someone extraordinary, he said quietly, and I treated her like she was invisible. There's no version of an apology that makes that acceptable. I know that. He held her gaze, but I want you to know that I see it clearly. All of it. What I wasted, what I missed, what it cost you, not because of me specifically, but because people like me have been looking through people like you your entire career. And that is a failure I was part of. Maya was very still. Your orange juice, he said. She blinked, just once. I remember it, he said. I moved it aside without looking at you. I've thought about that more than you'd think. He paused. I'm sorry, Maya. Not the vague general kind, the specific kind. For every morning I made you feel like you weren't there. The diner sounds continued around them, indifferent and ordinary. Maya looked at him for a long, measured moment, the way she had looked at him across the boardroom table, taking his full measure without flinching. Then something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just eased. The way a door eases open when someone finally knocks the right way. I accepted your apology on Wednesday, she said. That part is done. He nodded. But I want to tell you something, she continued. She set the coffee pot on the edge of the table and folded her hands in front of her with the quiet authority of someone who has decided the time for professional distance is over. I was a regional VP. I had a team of 7. I was good at my job, genuinely good. And I walked away from all of it without a second of regret because my mother needed me. Derek listened without moving. When I came back here, people stopped seeing the person I'd been, including me for a while. She paused. You weren't the only one who looked through me. You were just the most consistent about it. A small, dry beat. Not quite a smile, almost. I used that. I want you to know that. I used 11 months of being invisible to build something I believe in completely. In a notebook under a diner counter, and I walked into your boardroom knowing exactly who I was. She held his gaze. You didn't break me, Derek. Nobody did. But you were a very useful reminder of why I was fighting. Something moved across his face, relief and shame and something else. Something that had no clean name. I'm glad you fought, he said. I know, she replied. I read the 2 words you wrote on my application. The corner of his mouth moved. Exactly right. Exactly right, she confirmed. 3 weeks later, the Callaway Group board voted to reinstate full funding for the Rooted Future project. The deciding factor, according to the meeting minutes, was a comprehensive impact analysis submitted jointly by the foundation director and the newly appointed community development coordinator Maya Ellison. The vote was 6-1. Patricia Holt abstained. Maya's co-op launched 6 weeks after that. The bakery on 4th Street got its website. The hardware store ran its first digital campaign and reported a 22% increase in foot traffic within the first month. The bookshop owner, 63 years old, 31 years of quiet dedication, was featured in a regional magazine. She cried when she read it. She called Maya from the shop and cried on the phone. Maya sat in her car in the parking lot and let her. Derek came into the diner every morning. He still sat at table 4. He still ordered the same thing: black coffee, egg white omelette, water with exactly 2 ice cubes. But the phone stayed in his pocket. The leather folder stopped appearing. And every morning, when Maya brought the coffee, he looked up. Sometimes they talked about the project, the co-op, the businesses, about his father, occasionally Gerald Calloway, who had believed in communities the way some people believe in gravity, as something invisible and fundamental and absolutely necessary. About her mother. Once, on a slow Friday morning when the diner was quiet and the conversation found its own depth without either of them planning it. Other mornings they said very little, but the silence had changed its shape entirely. On a Tuesday in late January, Maya arrived at the diner to find something waiting at table 4. A small glass of orange juice, placed in the exact center of the table. No note, no explanation. She stood looking at it for a long moment. Patty appeared beside her, studiously wiping a counter that didn't need wiping. He was here early, she said, without looking up. Left before the rush. Maya picked up the glass. She thought about 11 months of mornings, about the notebook under the counter, about a boardroom full of people who had never considered what they might be overlooking, about her mother's house 3 blocks away, still holding the shape of everything she'd loved, about the cost of invisibility and the quiet, patient power of being seen. She thought about how a story could turn on the smallest possible gesture: a glass of juice, placed and rejected, placed again and finally received. She drank it standing at table 4, set the glass down gently, and smiled, not for anyone watching, not for the room, but for herself, for the woman who had kept showing up, kept building, kept believing, long before anyone thought to look. Because in the end, the most extraordinary thing about Maya Ellison was never that Derek Calloway finally saw her. It was that she had never once stopped seeing herself. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room where you deserve to be seen, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're the person who hasn't been looking up, it's not too late. Look up. The most extraordinary people in your life might be standing 3 feet away. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. We'll see you in the next one.